Hi everyone, my name is Era and I'm the host of the Tamil Creator Podcast. I chat with creators from all over the world to share their stories and discuss hot topics in a way that I hope inspires, educates, and entertains you.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
Hi everyone, this is Era, your host. As you know, I've been working really hard to get great guests and deliver good content to you. Now I need your help with three things. Number one, give this podcast a 5 out of 5 review on whatever platform you're listening to, whether it be Spotify, Apple, or Google Podcasts. Number two, please sign up for the newsletter. There'll be special benefits for just newsletter followers. And follow all our social media platforms. Really want to get the word out to a growing audience. And number three, join the VIP fans program where you will get benefits like personal shoutouts on the podcast, producer credits, and the chance to speak with me one-on-one and or private group discussions with guests I've had on the podcast. That's awesome, right? So get more details on my website at thetamilcreator.com or reach out to me at hello@thetamilcreator.com. Thank you, guys. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Tamil Creator. I'm your host, Era. And today I have the privilege of interviewing a good friend of mine, Kumutha Ramanathan, or Kumsi as I call her. And I've actually known her for quite some time. We go back all the way to grade 9 French. When I think I first met her, I was wearing a toque in summer. Don't ask me why. Uh, and that girl and this girl who's on the podcast with me now decided to stay friends with me during all this time, even though we started off with such a awkward first interaction. So before I kind of go further, and Kumutha, just so I shouldn't assume that everyone is listening knows who she is, but Kumutha is, I would say, a semi-famous Canadian reporter who went on to kind of move to the UK and become even more famous there in the journalism realm. And yeah, I really kind of wanted her to hop on today to kind of share her journey, share her story, and for you guys to kind of see her awesome personality. So without further ado, I will let Kumutha introduce herself and maybe further elaborate on that awkward first interaction we had.
Well, first, thank you so much, Ara. And you obviously have enough blackmail material to last a lifetime, and that's probably why I keep you around. And you are quite funny, so there's that as well. But thank you again for having me on the podcast. You've been doing a fabulous job. I love the first one, and I know it's just going to go from strength to strength. So all the power to you. So me, what's the story? I mean, as you know, Arvidan will tell you, my very first memories in life were living in Parkdale and then eventually going to move to Scarborough and love life in colorful Scarborough, and, really was, that girl from Scarborough, like every other, Sri Lankan girl coming up. And it was a great place to be. I met so many amazing people that I'm still friends with. As you can tell, I've lived in the UK for almost 10 years, but I still have my strong Canadian accent, and that's not going anywhere. And, I just I'm still very much that girl that you met back in grade 9, who is just sort of embracing anything and everything that comes my way. And, I feel so privileged to have grown up in Canada and to have my Sri Lankan identity. And now I'm raising 2 kids and want them to also have this sort of hybrid identity that so many first generation immigrants and their kids have. And so, just trying to figure it out day by day.
Yeah, and I feel like if there's anyone built for journalism, and who knows where the future will go, but if there's anyone built for it, I feel like it was you. I feel like I have so many memories of Kumutha telling it as it is, whether it's in a personal or professional setting. I feel like journalism, as far as I know, it is kind of really kind of telling the truth. And Kumutha does
Yeah.
not hesitate when it comes to telling the truth.
Minus the swear words and inappropriate banter, but yes,
We won't bring that up though. Kumutha's all
yeah.
professional. Um, One thing, why don't we start at the very beginning? Obviously I met you kind of when you were in Scarborough, Woburn days. Shout out to Woburn. Um, I think I've always remembered you wanting to kind of get into journalism. And it's just so fascinating because most people don't really know what they want to do with their life, but you from like a young age, you had this clear idea or vision of like where you saw yourself. And I know that kind of took you from like U of T Toronto all the way in like places like Winnipeg, minus 30-degree weather, to like obviously London and like other parts of Canada. So maybe tell us how it kind of started. Like what was the thing that sparked you to kind of get into journalism?
Okay, sounds great. So I, at a very young age, was just a voracious reader. I loved it. My dad was one of those people who was very plugged in to politics, what was going on in the community, had this strong sense of activism that ran through him, and the belief that you can make a difference in the community around you. And he really was, the most influential person in my life. And so that really was the sort of seed early on. Ironically, he'd never wanted me to go into journalism. Just think, Sri Lankans fled a country where journalists are persecuted, and all that those people of his generation aspired for is to survive. That's a basic fundamental need. They didn't have the privilege of thinking that they wanted to find themselves and figure out what really moves and inspires them. No, they were thinking about, how am I going to stay alive and avoid being hit by these bullets or having my house burned down. All of those things propelled them forward. And so when his daughter, and his only daughter, said to him, I want to be a journalist, his first thought was, what is wrong with you? There's so many other professions you can pursue. You don't have to face any of the discrimination that he did in his generation just to even get a position in university. And so, it was definitely a dinner table conversation that seemed to roll on and on. But, I, again, as I said early on, I tried to embrace everything and anything. And I still remember being, I think it was in calculus class with you, Arvind, where, this is years after the very first interaction we had in French class. And just for all of the listeners out there, this was the era of Arvind, who we called Nelly, with a band-aid on his nose.
Forgot about that.
But look, you rocked it. You rocked it. I was convinced there was something growing underneath that Band-Aid. I think that it was just a fashion statement. But back to the story. So, so I just continued on that path and kept writing, and was just took advantage of whatever came my way. And there was actually a journalist who I would call Uncle Victor. He was a very accomplished journalist in Sri Lanka, fled like so many others in his generation. And he really encouraged my talent when I was about 12. He would get me to write for Tamil newspapers. I would go to the zoo. I remember one of the very first stories I did with him. We went to the zoo, and I interviewed one of the zookeepers at the Toronto Zoo.
That's awesome. I didn't know that.
Yes, and I think it was Serendipum or one of those papers, and it just sort of really sparked something in me. And he ultimately wrote one of my reference letters for Columbia when I went for my master's degree. But anyway, so that was early on, and I just continued writing, and I would take the math and science classes my dad wanted me to take, but my heart just wasn't in it. And as I became more determined to prove myself, I ended up carving out my niche, and I started volunteering at local community stations. I mean, this is one of the things that I always tell people who ask me for advice, is there are so many free resources available to you that you don't have to pay to find your way in any industry. And never be afraid to ask someone for some advice for 5 minutes. 5 minutes is not a large commitment for even the busiest person. And I was never afraid to ask for that help and to create opportunities for myself. So the agreement with my father out of high school was I was going to pursue a career in law if this whole journalism thing didn't work out. And so I applied and was accepted to a political science program at U of T. And so that's what I did. And so I went to U of T, loved it. And I specifically placed myself at U of T St. George because I thought I was going to be this renegade political reporter in Canada. And so I thought, I want to be next to the Legislative Assembly of Ontario, which is right next to U of T St. George. And so I chose that campus for that reason. And then I created an internship for myself at the legislature because I knew there was a press office, because I had been I think it was a page in the assembly itself. And so I snuck up, I wasn't supposed to, but I snuck up to the press gallery and I basically said to the first kind face I saw in the room, I would like to create an internship, and I'm here, you don't have to pay me, let me just come. And it was the best thing I did. And they created a program, a formal program after I was first one, and then they created a program for other journalists to take advantage of this opportunity to be around these seasoned reporters, award-winning correspondents. And so I started working there. And when you are immersed with the best of the best, you will only get better. Those are I would go on to gain formal training in journalism, but I think that what I learned at the press gallery was so valuable. And again, all free. And it was just the best thing I could have done at that time, I think. And it was actually the journalists there, while they were so talented, they said to me, print journalism is a dying breed. And they said, focus on broadcast. There are opportunities. Everyone, even the print journalists at the legislature, were being forced to learn how to shoot video and to do all these different things. And so I thought, okay, this is a viable alternative to what I thought I was going to be, which was maybe some, sort of a print writer. And so I just continued on. So while I was interning at the press gallery, I was also taking classes at U of T, and then I was also volunteering at Rogers TV in Mississauga, I think it was. So I was just a girl out and about, just sort of living and trying different things. And when I worked at Rogers, I was working as a real reporter. So I was a volunteer reporter, but by the end of my 2-3 years there, I had a demo tape, which most people only build after having gone to school formally to study journalism, because they'll get it as part of their coursework. And so I was sort of like a dog with a bone. I was so determined this is what I was going to do. I just continued trying to find work. And so when I came close to graduating, I finally had enough work to put together a decent demo tape. And I sent that out to various employers all across Canada. And these are the days, Arvind, of the CDs, that you have to burn a CD, and then you have to send a physical CD out to someone. So that's how it all began. I still remember making copies of those CDs, buying those big, towers of CDs that I would have to shove into a mailbox and send to the middle of nowhere, and make a phone call to all of these news directors across Canada. And I created a relationship with one, and as a job became open, she gave me a shot, and she said, I watched your demo reel, and I think you're a really brave person, because I think I had snuck into an election campaign event, and before the security could pull me out of the event, I'd interviewed the MP who had won or something. So I was interviewing and running at the same time, and I was pulling the MP with me.
That's so awesome.
And you have nothing to lose at that point, right? What are they going to say? You can say sorry and then just kind of move on, right? And so that's she thought it was great, and so she gave me my shot, and it was incredible. I mean, I went to an even smaller town. I went beyond Winnipeg. I went to Brandon, Manitoba, which many people have not heard of, to a small CTV affiliate which no longer exists, called CKX. And I started out as a reporter, and then I became an anchor and a reporter, and I loved it. I think, seared in memory are some of the most incredible experiences that I've had. I mean, I went to First Nation reserves, and I was covering flooding that was happening on the reserves. I'd never been outside of Ontario. I didn't realize how ignorant people in Toronto are to what the rest of Canada looks like even. And so that in itself was a learning experience. And, I went to farms. I studied political science at U of T, and I was finally actually connecting the dots because I covered a lot of trade disputes and how that impacted cattle farmers and dairy farmers and just people working in the agricultural industry, because there's a lot of farming that happens in Manitoba. And so I learned so much from my experience in Brandon. And unfortunately, I was laid off like everybody else because our station was put up for sale. And again, another learning experience. You think that's the most devastating thing that could happen. Now I can laugh and say, oh, it was just sort of meant to happen that way. And it sort of propelled me in a different direction. Then I went to CTV Winnipeg and also gained more experience. And things just sort of move forward. And a lot of the times in my career, I think what has helped is, I would say for majority of my jobs have come through personal referrals and not for me just blindly applying for something. And so it's important to always, try to maintain good relationships with the people you work with, because you never know when that's going to come in handy. And equally, I have helped other people in my industry and beyond try to get jobs, get internships, that sort of thing. So you always want to be sort of paying it forward. And then so I just continued doing that. And then eventually, when I was in Brandon, Manitoba, I remember there was a point where I thought, will I ever make it back to Toronto? That's what I was thinking. London was not even in on my horizon then. And so I was in Brandon, and then I went to Winnipeg, and then the call for CB24 came. And again, just networking. There wasn't a job that I applied for. I just happened to meet someone who knew the news director, who liked me, who thought I had something special. And then I met the news director at CB24, and he eventually hired me. And that was also an incredible experience. There's always, I guess, that, lingering Sri Lankan immigrant of me who thinks further education is the way forward. So for many people, CB24 would sort of be it. You're in Toronto, the biggest market, don't go anywhere else. But I wanted to expand my options, and Canada was great. And I would always, want to have a firm foothold in Canada, but I wanted to see what else was out there. And I knew having a Columbia degree would allow me to do so. And I actually got the job at CB24 the same day I was accepted to Columbia. And so I went to CB24 knowing that I had this offer. And I just was really honest with my boss at CB24, and I told him, this has come up. And he said, it's an achievement. I completely understand. Go, you're always welcome here. And, we left things on really good terms. And so I went to Columbia, and then, London popped up as an option for me. And so I moved over here, and then I explored things after Columbia in London. And I decided to specialize in business journalism because I could see a real need for it. And I going back to the experience in Brandon and being laid off, I was laid off. This was back in 2008, the financial crisis. And you realize you could be in this little town in Brandon, Manitoba, but the, global forces, the world are still hurting you, because CTV at the time was really being impacted negatively from falling ad revenue as a result of car companies and different players not advertising as much during the financial crisis. And so, all of these things have a knock-on effect. And so moving to London has been so wonderful in so many ways. I've started my family here. I have made so many friends from so many countries. My kids are fully immersed in the culture and the community here. But Toronto is still, I'm still that girl from Scarborough, Parkdale, if you early on, just figuring it out. So I don't feel any different. I think environments I'm in have changed, but I think I'm still very much that same person that you met back in grade 9.
You did a great job summarizing kind of that whole trajectory of, because I was going to ask you about like, why did you choose to go to Columbia? What made you go to London? But you kind of answered a lot of things. I think one of the things about London I'd want to ask you or dig further is a lot of people are hesitant to kind of work overseas just because, it's like a lot of unknowns, right? New country, new like support network, etc. Um, and also like you were in a relationship as well. So like it's like all these things were complicating like your desire and your like aspirations to kind of be this like not like journalist with international exposure. So how did you kind of go through that decision making of like going to London and then deciding to kind of stay there? I think you've moved there like quite a like while ago. Like you're now almost, I think you're officially a citizen of like the
Yes,
UK, right?
yeah.
So yeah,
It's coming up to 10 years. It's crazy that I've been here so long.
wow,
Not just that I've been here so long, but I moved here. I had no kids. I was
yeah,
unmarried,
yeah.
still going out drinking, being slop, all of those things. And now I'm a mom. I have to be responsible. So, it's funny walking down the same streets where I remember, you know, going out and having a great time. And you think, now I've got a stroller and I'm trying to find my kid. And, it's so funny. But London is great. And it's, taking the plunge. I've always been the kind of person who doesn't think too much, sometimes to my detriment, but other times I just kind of go for it. And I have always one thing about me is I've always thought, what is the worst thing that could come out of this? I fail or it doesn't pan out exactly as I hope. At least I tried, right? Life is too short. Just try, just go for it. And I think this is something that Americans are very good at, and I think very much culturally distinguishes Americans and Canadians from the Brits. Whereas I think British culture, I love it. I embrace the people here. They have been wonderful to me. But I think British people are a little bit more afraid to fail. And it's not inbred in the same way that I think that it's encouraged back home. And I think there is this idea of uniformity that should exist sometimes. And again, this is not a blanket assumption or attack on everybody. But what I mean is even just in the school system, when you see kids walking down the street here, going up the equivalent of a Canadian public school, so free schools here, they're wearing suit and ties. So at a very young age, there is a different level of expectation that you sort of fall into line. And I didn't have that growing up in Canada. You probably didn't have that either when when you're a kid. You just sort of did what you wanted to. Now my conversations with friends as I'm raising kids, it's really different. It's not, kids passionate about it, but we're talking about tests that they'll have to do, standardized testing. And I would have done terribly in the school system here, I think, because I was just a dreamer. I was the kid who was, writing all the time. If you asked me to sit down for a test, I was never tested, but I couldn't sit still. I was just bouncing all over the place. And so, it is different. It's a very different system, but that has been important. And I think integral to my growth as a person and professionally is that ability to just try it and go for it. And the pieces may fall into place. And usually things work out the way they're supposed to. So I don't know, that's how I've lived my life.
How did you find like friends or build like a support network there? And I guess another part of that kind of just because I remember when you went to London first, and I've heard this from other Canadians that went there, um, you kind of like really, really loved it. But then I guess over time, that love affair kind of goes away, maybe if that's like, I guess the phrase where like you kind of appreciate what Toronto brought versus like, London is kind of the epicenter, not the epicenter, but one of the major ones, obviously, in the world around culture, travel, etc. So maybe talk about that too.
So it helped that I didn't have kids yet. And my now husband, then boyfriend, and I we're very social people. And so we built our lives around our friends and the things that we enjoy doing. And I'm also extremely independent, as you know. And I think part of being in a relationship with me is understanding that I need my space to carve out my own niche, have my own tribe of people. And that's what I built when I came here. I had no idea what I was doing. I did not have a job. I was, back then we were both sort of trying to make it happen for ourselves, right? And in that process, I had the advantage of, being able to allot time and money to building myself up into the person I wanted to be. So I wasn't able to get jobs. No one was looking to hire me. All the experience I built in Canada meant nothing in London. To them, I might as well have just been fresh out of school. So I kind of had to start from nothing. But that sort of hustler mentality that I had when I was starting out in Canada just came to be, and I just continued, and so I took my first job at a startup news organization, hosting this embarrassing show. Actually, no, embarrassing only because I was totally out of my comfort zone, but it was a good experience. And someone I work with there recommended me for another job. And so I went from that job to another one. And then at the next job that I had, I was a business correspondent working for this multimedia organization. And then someone from that job recommended me for the job at Bloomberg. And so then I went on to Bloomberg. So it's funny how things work out. You just sort of, you meet people, you vibe, and they see how you are under pressure. And things sort of work out as they're supposed to. But I remember those first few months, I couldn't get anyone to pick up the phone. Like I said, I didn't have enough experience. And slowly working in the background was, as you also said, building that social network. And so I was making friends. I also was part of the Columbia alumni community. And so that was basically alumni events held by the American university I went to in London. So I'd meet people through that, and they would become my friends. And so I would go out drinking and partying with them in London, and spent a lot of time just getting to know the city through them, actually, because they had come there for a few years, like myself. Many of them either didn't have a partner, or they were sort of on that path just as I was. So we were all sort of in the same place in our lives. And so that helped. And I made so many friends. I loved it. I was in awe of London and all the opportunities, just it all seemed like it was available and accessible suddenly. And so I think just having an open mind really, really helped. And it doesn't work for everyone. That's the thing, but again, it goes back to just jump and see what happens. And doesn't mean it's forever. You can always change your situation no matter what it is. And so for me, I think I was bolstered by the fact that I already had someone who was living here. My now husband was already in the UK, had a job, so that that sort of grounded me as well. So I could be out there, so figuring out myself, my career, what I was doing, and I didn't have that pressure on me. I could figure it all out. But I think I also had to embrace and create these opportunities. No one came to me and said, I'm going to give you a job out of the gate. I had to go out and look for one. And so London has been good in that way. And the solidifying experience of having kids changes everything as well. Nothing makes you feel more, I think, a part of a community when you are grappling with the same day-to-day issues as somebody else who's also raising kids in the city and has the same aspirations for them as you do. And so I've built a secondary community, if you will, of sort of, I call them the naughty moms. It's very naughty, is something people say here. And we go out and we have fun, but we still have kids and responsibilities and all of that. And so I still have all those friends. It's funny, the friends that I had when I was when I had no kids, and it was early on in my time in London, I'm still friends with them. But a lot of them are, they're the artsy types. So they're documentary filmmakers and they're traveling the world. So they don't have time for me. So when they're in London, it's great. And pre-COVID, we would meet up sporadically. So I still feel like I'm still connected to that world, and they make me feel cool because reality is I'm, taking care of my kids a lot of the time. But it's all good. It's all good.
One of the themes, like I just noticed, I guess, throughout your whole kind of narrative is around kind of networking and creating opportunities through that. And, one of the stories I kind of wanted to bring up around that theme was obviously The Social is one of my wife Claudia's favorite shows. And, she's just watching one, Monday afternoon or whatever the day it was. And then I just hear a scream, Era, come here. And I was like, I thought somebody died. And she's like, look who's on TV? And it was you. So, tell us about that experience. I mean, I think you mentioned it was kind of around networking, but it was kind of cool to kind of see someone that I knew from Toronto who's now living in London through the power of technology participate on a Canadian-based, host show, like a talk show. Sorry. So tell us how the experience came to be, and is a talk host or talk host, is that something kind of in your future?
So it
Talk show host.
again is networking and keeping all options on the table. London is great. Canada is also great. So we'll just see what presents itself. But the host, or the social rather, was a great opportunity, and it was so Arvin, and solid disclaimer here, didn't know because I thought I was going to fall flat on my face because I'm used to hard news, talking about economics and finance, and you kind of have to keep your personality more on the down low. But when you're on a talk show, though, it's personality driven, right? And so I thought, okay, let me quietly do this and see. Maybe no one will notice, but Arvin, of course, blasted it on social media for all my friends within 5 seconds of him posting something about my appearance. We're like, why did you tell me you're on? Anyway, so the hosts were absolutely wonderful. I had so much fun. And, is it in my future? Who knows? I think when I was younger, I felt like I had so much to prove in my career. And now, as I get older, I just want to, I take myself less seriously. How about you? Or how do you feel?
I think I definitely, as I got older, I don't know if I've always taken myself not seriously. Like I'm not afraid to make fun of myself. But I think as I get older, one of the things that I do notice is I care way less about, like every year I get older is like one factor that I care less about what people think. Not that I don't, like I'll do whatever I want with, and like, make people look bad, etc. I just don't care what people think about like my career choices or how I raise my kids or where I live. Like I'm just like, I'm gonna do my own life. People, like somebody told me a really fun, like interesting saying, I'm gonna mess it up, but something around, you'll stop caring what other people think of you when you know how little they think of you. Like in the sense that everyone has their own problems. They're like, everyone's very self-centered. It's a human like nature thing. So they have their own problems, their own things that they're worrying about. They don't have time to think about, oh, look at Era, he's doing that. Like, ha ha. Like, even if I did something embarrassing, people are not going to notice for more than like a day or a week unless I did something really crazy. But you look at like people like, Kim Kardashian or like others who had like a sex tape or like it's some crazy scandals. People don't remember like months or years down the line. So that's kind of really helped me kind of along in my own evolution and like my own choices that I make. So
that's wonderful. And I'm actually trying to teach that to my kids. Well, the oldest one who can understand because the youngest is a baby. And my oldest was saying to me something about, because he's not even 4 yet, so I get bits and pieces of stories about what happens at nursery. But he'll tell me about someone he doesn't like or someone who didn't want to play with him or something like that. And I try to tell him, look at mama, not everybody likes me and not everybody wants to play with me either. Okay. And I think we kind of have to, I wish I had learned that lesson at a younger age. And if I could teach my kids anything, I would want to instill in them the confidence to be just who they are. Individuality is so important. And I think sometimes Sri Lankan parents do their own children, first generation Sri Lankan parents do their children a disservice by focusing so much on shame and making decisions out of fear. And I think that if you want to really empower your kids to be the best versions of themselves, you have to say that, you have to tell them those things. And I'll tell you, I've never read a parenting book. I don't want to. I'm sure I would be shamed out of wanting to be a parent because I make mistakes all the time. But that's just my approach. I think that kids should learn what it feels like to be alienated, ostracized, all those things. As hard as it is for a mother, you kind of have to face rejection to move forward, don't you, a little bit?
I fully agree. I think in the nature of kind of what you do as well, journalism, and we'll touch on what you're doing kind of now, some of the other things you're branching off into. But I think in the world of journalism, you're going to sometimes say or ruffle feathers, right? Like you're going to, by inherently the nature of the job, somebody is going to be annoyed or pissed off at what you're saying. And some people might agree with you. That's just kind of the nature of the beast.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
but yeah, one of the things I also want to talk about was, you're like, you have this like pretty, I think we'd call it award-winning kind of career so far as a journalist. And one of the things you're kind of delving into and kind of exploring on the side is, entrepreneurship. And, you launched this business that has kind of a bigger, broader message than beyond what you're kind of selling. So maybe I'll let you kind of tell the story of like, what is it that tell us about this business you've kind of launched, the why behind it, and kind of what you kind of hope to achieve with that as well.
Okay, well, thank you for the recognition. I do appreciate it. So Brown Skin Essentials is a business that was born out of my own frustration, basically. So as I said earlier, moved here nine-ish years ago. When I arrived and I was getting ready to go to job interviews, I went to the sort of UK equivalent of a Shoppers Drug Mart, trying to find tights in my own skin tone. And I couldn't find anything. And I thought, I am a consumer in your shop. I should be represented. This is not earth-shattering stuff, right? This is really, really fundamental. I should be able to find makeup in my color. I should be able to, whatever it is I need. I don't think that I am sort of the minority. I look around me, a very diverse customer base that's coming in here. So that sort of planted a seed in me. And as I thought about it more and more, I thought maybe there is a business in this, a business case that I could make. But again, doubling down on my journalism career, I thought I don't have the capacity to really think about this. And so it was just always this thing that was in the background, and something that I've talked to you about because I've watched with amazement at how you built. I mean, I don't know if many viewers know this, but Arvind was an entrepreneur before it was fashionable to be called an entrepreneur. He was one of those people who, 10 plus years ago, even going further back than that, was trying and experimenting and applying his expertise in engineering to all kinds of fields and able to build incredible products and innovations. And so, I always thought that was really cool that you did that. And so I think we sort of fed off of each other a little bit in our conversations when we're out, just kicking back, having drinks or whatever. And so, as you can see, it's a running theme in my life. I'm always drinking. That's just journalism makes you drink a lot. A lot of the best journalists drink the most. But anyway, so it was always an idea, but I just didn't really have the guts or the capital to do it. So when I started a family, I basically just went to hell with it. I'm going to try this, and the business was born, and it's been great. I'm always amazed by the response and the number of people that you can touch. And I'm not trying to say by any means that I'm changing the world, but what I think I am doing is I'm creating a space for people who otherwise don't see themselves reflected. And that feels tremendously valuable. For instance, I'm going to be doing an interview in a few weeks with Tights for Men, which is an online blog devoted to men who like to wear tights. And you probably didn't even know that, Arvind, then as a heterosexual male, that
No.
there is a demographic for men who like tights. But you would be amazed at how many of my customers are men. And I think by having a direct-to-consumer model, it takes a shame out of men who might during the daytime be out in a full suit walking around, may not want to be perusing the women's lingerie aisle. They're able to buy what they need off of my site. And I have a lot of regular customers who are actually men, and very passionate men who write to me and ask me why I don't offer this type of product for them, or whatever the case may be. But it's not just men, but it's men of color. And you'll know this, when I was in New York doing my master's, I had a friend from Toronto who was actually a closeted gay Sri Lankan man who will go unnamed because he's closeted. And I spent a lot of time in gay bars with him in New York City. And I don't even want to tell you what goes on in gay bars in New York City, but what's important is to realize that the definition of what is beautiful and how men, women, everyone in between define themselves is very, very vast and ever evolving. And I thought, look at these beautiful queens, which is all that I could describe them as. And they see themselves as beautiful and want to dress in a way where they show off their legs and their features and whatever it may be. And so I don't know, I want to create a business that celebrates individuality, not one definition of beauty, but just the person in their most celebrated form. And so that's basically what drives any product launch, any new sort of slant to the business. It's really driven by that desire to celebrate individuality.
That's awesome. Like that's crazy. Like you're running a business, you were like a journalist, and you'll probably still continue doing that. And also you're a mom, and you have a family. So I think that was kind of leading to one of my other questions, kind of around how do you balance. I think we talked about this as well, but or maybe I talked about it with somebody else, but when you start having a family, or you decide to become a mom, it's almost like you get penalized by the working world for kind of making that choice. So how do you kind of balance your personal aspirations of wanting to continue being like a journalist and explore what that looks like, building this business that you have, but also the responsibilities that you have as a mom as well? Like, how do you balance that?
Not well. I think that's the first thing everyone should know. I am not a magician. I am one person who makes mistakes every day. At the same time, I am more loving to myself at this stage in my life than I probably was when I was younger. And you just have to, sometimes when you are in a bad place, this is what I think primarily motivates me. Because I am so goal oriented, if I don't hit the mark in any aspect of my life, I always, I'll give myself a second to feel the pain, whatever, and be upset. But then I always think I'm going to double down and prove myself that I can do it, or I am indeed worthy, whatever it is. It's really about your self goals and attaining them at the end of the day, right? And that's what drives me. And so, my kids are happy, they're fed, they're healthy, they're taken care of overall. Do I lose my temper sometimes? Do I, spoil them too much? Yes, I do all of those things, but I'm still a mom. And I think what has helped a lot is that I'm really, as much as I'm this very social person, as you know, I love to go out, I love to be around people. I also really enjoy being by myself and working on the business, and it's a passion project. And so I'm perfectly fine putting the money that I would otherwise be using to go out partying to building the business, because I feel like this isn't an investment in my future, just as it's an investment in my children's future and my, my broader family's future. I think that it's a worthwhile endeavor. I feel that I am equipped with the basic skills to succeed. And if it works out, great. If it doesn't, as with everything in life, at least I tried, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's all you can do at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think you said, you kind of changed your habits a bit by obviously COVID kind of forced your hand a bit as well, and being like a new mom as well, um, to what money you or time you would have spent socializing to kind of focus on your business. So outside of connected to that, what kind of habits or behaviors have you kind of picked up maybe in the last couple of years while going through this journey that's really helped you, you know, uh, maybe become a better entrepreneur, at least be able to focus on that or the other endeavors that you want to kind of do?
I think that you have to be humbled by the realization that if you want to have a business, you have to learn to do a lot of things yourself, but also you have to know what has to be farmed out to someone who is actually an expert. And so, I know that I can be a visionary and grow certain aspects of my business. But for instance, I have a salesperson who helps me grow the business. And it's important that it's not me because I don't think I have the emotional intelligence that it takes to strike the sort of relationships she does and to go out there, build the networks and contacts that she has, and also have the patience to see through a deal from inception to full execution. That's really difficult. You need a certain mindset. You need to be in the know, and you have to, I work with someone who is in the lingerie hosiery world. That is her world. I will never have the same contact base that she has, and that's okay. I'm just privileged to be able to work with her. Another example is, I've always enjoyed writing. I write my own copy. I create a lot of my own marketing literature myself because that's something that I'm good at. I think I'm good at it. I create the visuals around the business, but I take a lot of the photography myself. Before COVID, I would go out and take photos with models that I continue to use on social media. But I'm getting to the point where I'm going to have to bring in professionals and a studio and, the whole shebang, because now I'm selling to a different type of customer that wants different types of photos. So I'm going to have to get someone to do that as well. I am not an accountant. I have an accountant, all of those things. So you need to know what you're good at and what you're not good at. And you also have to understand what value you serve in a crowded marketplace, and never assume that your customer is dumb. You always have to assume that your customer, in the day and age that we live in, where people have access to the internet and information at their fingertips, people are always going to cross compare your product to somebody else's. So you have to know what distinguishes yours from theirs, and you have to be able to sell that to someone. And people, I think, I've heard quotes around everything has an assigned value, and what value is really about perception at the end of the day, right? People perceive a value. If you look at a diamond, for instance, a diamond is worth 5,000 to one person. It could be worth 10,000. It could be worth $1 million to somebody else, right? There's an assigned value. It's not always intrinsic. There's a multitude of factors that are involved. And so all of those things I take into consideration. And I'm by no means, I'm still running a startup, and I'm not at dizzying heights as some other people. So my feet are firmly on the ground. I'm humbled by the recognition that I've been able to get. I'm proud of the progress we've made. I'm uncomfortable enough that I want to keep growing the business. And so that's really what drives and fuels me. And I'm happier that I started this now and not in my 20s, because my 20s, like so many women, I was riddled with self-doubt and just sometimes it was to the point where I think I would have been too paralyzed by that self-doubt to actually move forward. Whereas now I'm extremely decisive, partly because I am a mom and, working full time. So I don't have the time to think about things as much. So I have to make decisions quickly. If I have an hour to work on something, a sales deal that's coming through, and making sure all the materials are in place for it to move forward, that's all I have is that hour, because I've got to get my kids ready for bed. I've got to wake up tomorrow morning and I've got to get them ready for school, and then I have to get to work. There's so many other things. So there's no time for any indecision anymore. And that makes me so much more efficient.
What about with like you kind of expressed all these learnings you've got? Are there like books that you've been reading, or like podcasts, or like just any other source of information that have given you this newfound knowledge? Or yeah, maybe talk about that as well.
So I have different communities that I'm a part of. There's a women's group of minority business owners in London that I'm a part of. I was just chatting with the girls a few minutes ago on my phone, and we're talking about meeting up after the COVID restrictions ease up, and we're going to have lunch and sort of just chat about everything under the sun: motherhood, having a business, what it's like to try to run a business when you're cash strapped, and all of those things. We inspire each other. I think this is such an invaluable community, and I feel so lucky to be a part of it. And then I love Dragon's Den, just because I like to see other people pitching ideas and going through that process. And I've had individual investors approach me a few different times about helping me grow the business. But part of running the business for me was, think about journalism. It is a really subjective, especially television news. It's a really subjective industry where a lot of it is around people and their opinions about you, which has worked in my favor. But at times it's also made me feel like I want to take back more control in my life. So I guess there's a stubborn part of me that wants to keep this baby mine. And I don't want an outside investor to come in and to drive and push and sort of steer me in a direction that perhaps I don't want to go into. I'm not saying I wouldn't take an outside investor later, but what I've told the ones that have approached me thus far is that's not something I'm interested in right now. Hit me up in 5 years and we'll see where I am. And it's really empowering to say that, because, for instance, even getting to the point where my business is not even 4 years old. I remember early on, I had an investor who wanted me to basically pay him £100,000 for him to consult and to get me into the shops that I'm already at a fraction of the cost. And I was able to do that without his help. And he, it shows you that, again, it's sort of like journalism and that hustler spirit. Do it at the cheapest cost possible. You don't have to always shell out a lot of money to get noticed and to be successful at anything. Find the cheapest way to do it. If our Sri Lankan parents have taught us anything, anything on, with modest means, right?
And I think it's interesting. Like I mean, you're kind of, I guess we're at the same age where we're not there yet, but we kind of start to think about this, where the choices we make now will kind of impact later on. And we both have kids. So kind of thinking
Yes.
about the choices we make will kind of, they're very observant. They'll kind of see what we're doing. So it kind of leads to a question I like to ask around legacy. So how would you describe the legacy that you would want to be known by? Like in a few sentences, like how would you want your friends and family to remember you by?
Wow, that's a big question. I think I want to know that I was a light in their life. So I think that can have a variety of meanings, because I recently lost someone, and I think of, when you lose someone, you realize that all that you're left with when that person passes is how they changed your life, right? What they brought into it and how they bettered it. And so I would want, whether it be my children or my friends, I'd want to know that I left them with something better. And I think also, working in the financial journalism world, not most, but a lot of the journalists come from privileged backgrounds, if you will. And some of the news organizations I've worked at have always been, people who were kind of already part of the 1%. So imagine they're reporting on themselves in some ways, right? Not that they don't deserve to be there, but they're already of that class. And, I will put my hand up and say, I want a social climb, not for myself, but I want a social climb for my kids. I want my kids to be in a different place than you and I were when we were, sort of carving out our place in the world, where my kids are not driven by a financial mandate. I want them to be driven by things that excite and inspire them, and not by the need to worry about their next bill. And I think that's financial empowerment. And if that is a legacy that my business or my career or the assets that I acquire along the way give them, then I think I've done my job. Because I think with every generation, you only empower the next one. And if my kids are, I always think it's funny to me, if my kids are sort of entitled and don't understand what the immigrant struggle is like, I think I've done my job. Not because I think that they're out of touch, but because I think that a generation has passed and we've handed them enough for them to be able to go out in the world and to make decisions differently. And going back to the example of being around really wealthy people move in the world very differently. They make decisions differently because they're not driven by that primal need to survive in the same way. And I don't know what that number is, but I just know that I want to be able to bestow upon them that sort of a lifestyle. And I know that's important to you as well.
Yeah, great answer. It's definitely something that drives me. Not that money is the end all be all, but I think people look at it as a tool to, like you said, basically our parents came and they were all about survival and kind of building we kind of were able to collect, I guess, off their backs, kind of be able to pursue careers like the ones we're doing now, or like dabble in like something like a podcast. They had no time for that. So our hope is, like you said, by giving them the financial freedom to kind of explore making an impact in the world instead of by choosing a job where they need money to pay the mortgage or I mean, they should have some level of struggle. I think struggle is kind of a character building exercise, but
Yes.
I definitely, everything you just said, I echo 100%. We talked about legacy. Who is somebody that you admire, both from the Tamil community, maybe like the global Tamil community or just anywhere, and also from the non-Tamil community, and like, why do you admire them?
Okay. So, Tamil community, I would go with Uncle Victor, who I told you was one of my references for Colombia. He is probably one of the most fearless journalists that I know. He passed a few years ago, but imprinted on me the importance of shining a light on atrocities and making sure that it's very cliche, but voice to the voiceless, it really matters. And I have so much respect for journalists who risk their lives and really want to change the world for the better, because a functioning democracy of any form needs journalists. And just look at the examples around the world of autocratic governments, and you can see if journalism is not thriving, what happens to society. So it's really a sensitive point for me when I hear of journalists being targeted for harassment, as Uncle Victor was in Sri Lanka. And I think it takes a lot of guts to be that person, right? It's one thing to talk about it, but it's another thing to actually live that experience. And sorry, what was the other part of the question?
The non-Tamil, like anybody, like a non-Tamil person that you'd kind of really admire.
Oh, non-Tamil. Oh my goodness. I find really ordinary. I don't want to pinpoint anyone specific, but I always find people working in the service industry really inspiring. And I think COVID has really shown us that we need them in our gluttonous, sort of trivial lives. There's so many unsung heroes who are working behind the scenes to keep institutions running, to clean buildings at night, to to do different types of work that we don't hear or see about, but it's so important to do. And I don't know, I always feel like um, I'm the most gracious with people that I think don't expect it, and people who are working in those industries sometimes don't get the recognition they deserve, and that's a spotlight I'd like to shine. So I wish I had someone specific to say, but I'm always humbled by that, and I see them around all the time, and you take the time to speak to people in those industries, and it's important to just be kind to them and to realize that they're doing really hard work.
The interesting thing about that is, if you think about when we came into, let's say, Canada, the UK, like all the different diaspora communities that are Tamil or other communities, most people that do those jobs or did those jobs, and maybe to this day as well, were
Yeah,
often people of color, right? If you think about
right.
it. So maybe
Yeah,
that's kind of why, to your point as well, when I feel like they're people that work those jobs are typically almost, if you want to call them, the unseen, where you don't
mhm,
really, maybe you kind of notice them maybe at a restaurant or like you're in a building, you don't like see them,
yeah,
but they're doing the jobs that maybe people perceive to be unimportant or like unglamorous or like for the
yeah,
uneducated. But really there's a lot of context or like stories you don't understand, like why people chose those jobs or like even how they viewed your jobs. Like I think the guy who one of the guys I think of is the guy that was at, I think, Doritos or Cheeto, one of
mhm,
those like chip companies. I think it was
mhm,
Doritos. He was a janitor, and I think there was a call out by the CEO of anybody in the company, whoever, regardless of who you are, if you have an idea, come pitch me. And this guy actually called, like he was a janitor at the company or at the factory, and he called the CEO directly and said, "Hey, I have a great idea." And
yeah,
he didn't know that you're not actually supposed to call the CEO, but the CEO was like, "Hey, you have an idea? Come. You have 15 minutes
right.
with this date." And he actually invented like the spicy version of the Dorito because I think he was Hispanic. This is based in the US. And he product tested this and he's like, "I have a great idea. You're ignoring like 30% of the US market. Here's like a
Right.
multi-million or billion-dollar idea." And they
Wow.
actually took it, and he's now like the VP of product development. So, not to say like that's kind of what you should aspire to, but really like the learning from you that I got from
Yeah.
you is, number one, like our kind of history in places like Canada, the UK, our family started off in spaces like that, and number two is that and you can learn anything from anybody. So just because somebody's a CEO doesn't mean they have more life experience or like they're somebody to aspire to versus like you can also learn from somebody that is like a server. Like, I
Yes.
like I remember servers or like people that were super kind during that whole experience. Like they might be going through something difficult personally,
Right.
but like the way they make you feel during that experience, you would never know what's going on. And that's like an admirable skill. So yeah.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. And I think to do that type of work, it's noble work. It needs to be done,
Yes.
and I think it's also important. Like, yes, it may not be glamorous, but the people who do those jobs take great pride in their
Hmm.
work,
Yep.
right? Um, when I was giving birth uh, to both of my sons at the same hospital, you're up all hours of the night. Who's up? It's nurses sort of milling around helping you, but also at night, in the middle of the night, it's the janitors cleaning the hospital, right? And they take great pride in what they're doing, and they're so humble. And um, I always like to stop, and I just like to talk to people in general when I'm not distracted by my kids and just out and about. But yeah, I love to hear other people's stories. And you're right. I don't think there's enough attention paid to people who enjoy doing those jobs and they see themselves as contributing to society as much as maybe the doctor in the hospital. Here, there's been cases of people who have died. The janitorial staff who are cleaning the hospitals during COVID. Those people are so important. They're a rarefied breed. We don't talk about them. And I feel, you know, I just, I have so much respect for people like that.
Yeah, and yeah, there's a lot more we can kind of talk about that. But as we kind of delve into the last serious question of, before we kind of get into the fun speed round,
Yeah.
this podcast is called The Tamil Creator. So what piece of advice would you give to your fellow aspiring, Tamil creators?
I think just your idea doesn't need to be perfect to execute. I have made so many mistakes in getting my humble little business off of the ground, and you just have to sort of brush yourself off and keep going. And you can't wait for perfection because it just does not exist. You have to have your own standards. Obviously, you don't cheat people. Make sure you're providing them a service of value. But yeah, that would be my advice, really, because I think we, after I started my business, it's funny because I have so many of my friends who have now said, I have a great idea. I've always wanted to start X, Y, and Z business. And it's funny because I think to myself, and when I say to them, I'm like, just go for it then. Look into it and just do it. And then 6 months later, they'll say the exact same thing. And then 6 more months later, they'll say the same thing. So you can't just sit on it because life is too short. If I just didn't, I am so privileged. I realized that I was able to find the funds to go out and do it. I didn't have um, as many looming pressures as other people in my life. I was basically just worrying about myself, the baby that was about to come, and my husband, and that was it. We didn't have so many other problems to worry about. Uh, but I still had a lot to persevere to move forward with the business. It didn't mean that it was in any way a cakewalk. So just go for it. Really, just go for it. Figure it out and go for it. Because the worst thing you could do is sit and have a life of regret when you look back on your life and you wonder, where would it have taken me?
Great advice. I love it. Now we're going to kind of jump into, like I was saying, a fun speed round. So how this is going to work is I call the game Would You Rather? And basically
Yeah.
I ask you to, I name two things and you have to choose one. You have to tell me why. Okay?
Okay. Okay.
So the first one is, it's an easy one. I like to ask everyone. It's also for like market research, but mutton rolls or kotarati?
Mutton rolls.
Why?
Absolutely. Hands down.
Why?
And you want me to tell you why?
Yes.
Okay. Why? Because I think that, and I had to qualify this, fresh mutton rolls, not anything that's been sitting out for a while or has been, frozen and then thawed. They have to be fresh. They have to just have been made. You have to be eating it as you walk out of the Sri Lankan bakery. Those are the best mutton rolls, I think.
Good.
Why? Because it's just the perfect combination of meat, curry. It's handy. It's filling. It's a guilty pleasure. It's a meal unto itself. It's like self-compact, like a banana.
Banana. Okay.
It's a perfect meal. I don't know, but it's funny because we will walk where we live in London. There is no Sri Lankan restaurant or sort of takeout. You have to make a bit of a journey, but that journey is absolutely worth it for the simple pleasure of a mutton roll, a fresh mutton roll as you walk out. Takes me, it takes me back to my childhood in Scarborough with my dad, who was, I loved him, but he was like the ultimate, community champion because he would go to 5 different Sri Lankan grocery stores to get the perfect beans and fish and whatever else it was. And along the way, he had this annoying little kid that he would take to all of these shops. And, we had a circuit we would do, and I'd have mutton rolls, and I'd have an entire meal of guilt-ridden Tamil treats along the way. But, that was life back then.
That's awesome. I love it. All right. Next one is world-renowned journalist or world-renowned entrepreneur?
Ooh, that's a hard one. I think whatever gives me the most happiness. So I wouldn't say one or the other. I don't want to limit my options. Why not everything? Why not assume that I can be both and have it all? So there you go.
Sounds like a greedy person. Um, Toronto or London?
Oh, Arvind, don't do this to me. I mean, I think COVID has reminded us all how important relationships are. And at the end of the day, it's not where you are, but the people you're with. And Toronto will always be home for me. So, you know,
So you're saying
period.
Toronto. Okay.
I don't know
Uh,
when. Yeah, absolutely. Toronto will always be home. It's funny, the longer I live outside of Canada, the more I love Canada. Isn't that odd?
I think it makes sense. I think it makes sense. I think distance makes the heart grow fonder, I think.
Yes, and there's so much Canadians. Whenever I go home or whenever I hear from someone who's young is like, oh my goodness, I want to get out of Canada. I want to do exactly what you're doing. I want to live outside. I hate my parents. I want to leave everybody and go. I'm like, do it, and let's see where it takes you. Maybe you love it and you'll never go back.
Yeah, yeah.
Or maybe you'll want to do both and be a bit of a jet setter, or maybe you'll just go back as quickly as possible. Because I know, as you said earlier about your friends who come and leave, it's living abroad is not for everyone. I think that people don't realize, but I will say about leaving your comfort zone, you will do the most self growth when you leave your town and move to a different place. You don't have to go as far as I did to London. When I went to Brandon, Manitoba, before that, living at home, going to U of T and studying and sort of, my parents took care of the bills and did all those things. I got my first checkbook
Yeah.
when nobody uses checks anymore, but back then I had to write checks in my very first checkbook. My dad took a picture. This is how sad and pathetic and spoiled I was of me writing my first check because he got such a kick out of it because he spoiled me so much. But again, personal growth, right? All these things
Yeah.
that only happens when you're forced out of your comfort zone.
Okay. And this is the last one, but the most important. Ian Hanneman Singh. I can't even pronounce his name. Hanneman Singh, I think, right? Is that how you say?
Yeah.
Who is more handsome, Ian Hanneman Singh or Namal?
Oh my goodness. Arvind, are you really going to put me on the spot?
And you have to pick one, and it's going to be on the
I don't think this was in your list of.
record.
So I'm going to have to get you for this one. I would say they are both good-looking chocolate men, and I would be lucky to have either of them on my arm. And Namal is on my arm, and probably going to listen to this podcast. So
I hope he listens to this answer. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Kumutha, for kind of jumping on and I think for anybody that's going to be an aspiring journalist, I think they'll get a lot of this. But I think just kind of your journey of not being afraid to kind of explore different aspects of, your interests, I think will be inspiring for people. So, for anybody that kind of wants to stay connected with you, what's the best way for someone to kind of stay connected with you?
I'm on Twitter just for work a lot. So if you want to connect with me on Twitter, it's just Kumutha Ram, and that is spelled Kumutha Ram, RAM, all together, no spaces there. Anyone who's aspiring to get into journalism, I really want to reaffirm that you have to really be driven to do this, not for money, not for the glamour, not for the prestige. You really have to want to be a journalist because there's a hell of a lot of other easier ways to make money these days and other jobs that you could have that are a lot less stressful. So do it because you really want to do it, is what I would say. And all the power to you.
That's a great final message. She's basically kind of discouraging you, but that's okay. Um, so, as a final kind of wrap up for anybody listening to this podcast, please give it a 5 out of 5. It really increases or helps increase our visibility across all the platforms we're on. So that includes Spotify, Apple, or Google Podcasts. And if you could comment, share, and like our stuff on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter, that would be great. And if you have any feedback or ideas on future guests or even specific topics, please reach out to me at hello@thetamilcreator.com. Thank you guys so much, and thank you guys for listening, and thank you, Kumutha, for hopping on board.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.